Yeah, I would like to call the Finance Committee meeting of November 29th, 2022 to order at 5 minutes after 3. And thank everybody for being able to be here for the extra meeting so that we can continue work on the council guidelines, financial guidelines, budget guidelines that we're going to submit to the council for its consideration. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 as extended, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to access the meeting may do so via Zoom or by telephone. Every effort, no in-person attendance, members of the public will be permitted, but every effort is being made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. And I want to remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded. So with that, I want to go through the members of the committee to make sure that everybody can hear me and we can hear them. And I'll do it in alphabetical order. So I'll start with Lynn.
Present.
Bob.
Present.
Matt.
Present, thanks.
Bernie.
Present.
Michelle.
Present.
Kathy. Kathy, if you can hear us, unmute.
Here. Sorry, I'm here.
Okay, thanks. And Alicia.
Present.
Okay, and the others present at the meeting are Sean Mangano, our finance director, Athena Keefe, clerk of the council, and Bill Kazin, who's here to take notes and prepare minutes for the meeting. So that said, we should go on. And the agenda is really just in effect one item, which is the budget guidelines discussion, so that we can make recommendations to the council. We will have a period during that discussion for public comment, because that's an essential part of our process. And that's all that we have plans other than announcements for additional meetings or anything that people want to raise that's not anticipated 48 hours in advance. So the way that I was going to propose that we proceed is that at our last meeting, we made a list of the changes we would like to see or principles we'd like to see adopted in the draft. I worked over the weekend and prepared the draft, and I have now sent it to everybody, and I believe it has been placed in the packet. So what I was going to propose that we do, and Lynn is going to help us with this, is to go through and identify any items that you wish to include in the discussion today. And I don't want to get into why you want it. That's going to be in the next piece. Right now, it's just I'd like to discuss this section. And if you say the page number, I think that'll help everybody also. Lynn is going to take notes for us and maintain a list. We will then see if there's anybody who's going to have to leave the meeting before at a specific time, so that we can make sure that we get the order to address items that they wish that they've raised while they're present. And otherwise, once we get going, Lynn is going to identify each section that we're discussing, since she's the one who's maintaining the list. So with that said, I guess what I'd like to do is just ask people to raise hands. And if you have issues you would like to discuss out of the draft And we'll go ahead and assemble a list. So looking for hands. Kathy.
I'm not sure exactly how to proceed with what you just suggested, Andy, but I have a couple overarching comments, and then I've made some substantial edits or moving text around throughout the document. And so I really appreciate what you did in giving us a draft. So I'll try to list the kinds of substantive changes or moving around changes that I think would strengthen it. One is at the very beginning, I think I would be much stronger about the challenges we face, and just, it's not difficult. We face really major, and I would make a stronger statement there. And then you have, I think, again, in that beginning, you softened what I think we talked about last time, is that given what we're facing over the next several years, it won't be possible to start any new initiatives, or we advise against them. I'd like to state that stronger. So the 2.2% projected increase in revenue with an 8% health insurance premium, with pensions, with step increases, with inflation, is going to be a stretch to meet current commitments. And I just want to say that somehow really strongly at the beginning. And then throughout the document, I found those pieces, but I found them to be repetitive. So I wanted to stay at once strongly, and maybe we expand on it. So that was one piece. When I got to the revenue section, it wasn't just about revenues. It suddenly flipped to an override and budgeting. And I wanted to keep it cleaner, to just focus on revenues and make it shorter, so that so that I didn't get into, well, there's revenues, but if expenses were less than revenues, we don't have a problem. But I just wanted to talk about our sources of revenues and how restricted they are, and then get into the expenses more quickly. So I found that section, I want to move some paragraphs out of that. And I'm willing to make a stronger statement. Again, I thought it was soft, that we don't think we should do we should do an override just for operating budgets. We think that's a good policy. So I don't, so I'll stop there, because when I get to expenses, and to what we've done I would break it up with section headers, and have a section on schools, a section on townwide, a section on, I forget what my other section was, and a section on capital. And then I had places where I would condense, make it shorter. So I think we're writing for a general public. And then my last comment, because I see there are 3 hands up too, is as a reader, I find the absence of a table in this document makes it harder to read. So I understand we're cross-referencing to what Sean and Paul put together, but I'd like to have a simple table that shows revenues out, the timeline on revenues across the top, and something on expenses, so that we're not asking people to go look at page 26 or 27 of another document, but something simple. And I can outline what I think that would be, but just so we can see what we're talking about. So I'm just going to stop there, because then I'm be getting into very page specific as we go along. So that were some big takeaways.
Okay, that's helpful. Lynn, let me know if you need anything more.
I need Kathy to go back and say what she said about the revenue section. And are you talking about expenses for operating or general budgeting policy, or?
Okay. If we're going through pages, so when we get to, there's an overall, the way it's written is we have a few paragraphs at the very beginning, and I would insert a statement. So for example, I have absent any new ongoing sources of revenue, we're going to be hard pressed to maintain staffing levels, provide needed public services, including road repairs. I would just make a strong statement. And then the guidelines, when we get, there's a whole revenue section that starts, let me just, revenue, it's under the section Andy has titled fiscal. I mean, I'm just trying to be able to read my thing, but there's a really long section, and then we get into revenue projections. So some of that I found redundant, but under revenue projections, Andy has, because of good planning, there's been no need to ask for 2.5% an overriding. We've been able to manage, but it feels like that's not talking about the revenues. And up above, we also talk about an override. So I just found some redundant, and I would reorganize it. So without showing you my markup, it's hard to be more specific than that.
I think you get it. I want to continue on because I want to spend the whole time on the first section. The first section, of course, was labeled executive summary and overall philosophy and concerns for FY24. So if you feel that a topic fits there totally, then we should get it into that overall philosophy kind of section. Michelle?
I think I may have misunderstood the instruction. So we're going section by section right now and making comments.
No, well, just if you had an item, like you and I talked about one item
Yeah.
in particular.
Is it okay to
Yes.
give Lynn that item now? Okay.
Yes, I want everything out there so we know we can measure our time accordingly.
Okay, so the section that I wanted to discuss more is section 8, planning for future years. I think it's also page 8, depending on how your word is formatted. And this, I could say a little bit just about my reasoning for bringing this up very quickly is I think that we need to critically think about how we're framing this particular section in relationship to our higher ed institutions. And we know from the town manager evaluation this year that that particular piece was where the town manager evaluation sort of was, I would say, one of the poorer sections. And so I think there might be a direct correlation to how we're framing it in these budget guidelines. And it seems to me that there's even a bigger discussion that the council should have about how our relationship with the higher ed institutions. So I'll leave it at that. I was really hoping to have some proposed language, but I got a flat tire on my way home from seeing you, Andy, so I didn't get to it. But I can certainly do that and provide that, but that's what I'll say for now for that. Thank you.
But it's basically strategic partnerships that we were talking about. Okay, Bob?
Yeah, the only thing I had was section 5, probably page 7. I just wanted to add a sentence in there or two on expanding our capital inventory to include buildings and other key capital elements that will need maintenance, ongoing maintenance, and periodic maintenance in the future. That's all I had. Otherwise, I thought it captured our discussion pretty well.
Okay, thanks. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And I'll echo what other folks said. I really appreciate having something to react to this early in the process. I think I have maybe a couple clarifying questions. So just, I apologize if this is redundant. The budget coordinating group meeting, do we have a sense of, when that meeting will happen, and will our guidelines have been sent off to the council? What's the timing on that look like? Just.
Sean, do you know
unknown?
the answer to that? Is Paul come up with any possible date?
So I will double check, but my understanding is that would be requested by the schools at this point. Lynn, unless you've heard something else, and we can
They
certainly
have
reach.
made the request.
Okay.
And I don't think a poll has been done. They made it right before the Thanksgiving holidays. And so I don't think a poll has been done, but it needs to be. And they would want to have that meeting happen at least between the 5th and the 19th.
Before the guidelines. Okay.
December, right.
So there's no date set yet, but we will connect with them about getting that set soon.
And that's actually more what I wanted to know is that would happen in advance of this guideline. And then Andy, top of page 5, you said, if BCG recommends a variation from the policy for FY24 regarding, equal, equal increases, we ask our finance committee to consider the request and make a recommendation. I'm just, again, another clarifying question for me. Is that prescribed? In other words, is that a prescribed process that BCG makes a recommendation for our review and then our recommendation to the council, or is that sort of how we would like to see it? Just if you could just talk me through that.
Well, that's what the suggestion that I had made was that knowing that we didn't have a date for the BCG meeting, but that the school committee members had requested that we have one, and assuming that there was a reason that they asked for it, that they would have the meeting. And if the guidelines, if the meeting didn't get scheduled before the guidelines were adopted, that they would have, it would have to come back into the process. And so I put in that little bit there to assist it to go through the, in going through the process, because that would be then incorporated into the council guidelines. So
Well, that's, no, thank you. I mean, that's kind of I guess my ultimate point is, really, I think we really should try to incorporate that, that recommendation or finance's recommendation into these, into the draft, if possible, if the timing works out. I think we should strive for that, because that's a pretty major, variable. Just a couple of really quick things. I'm sure more will come up. Other folks have obviously got a lot of notes as well. Page 6, the CREST discussion. I think it's worth referencing the study that we're trying to, launch in terms of efficacy and, all things CREST. I think it's going to be really important for folks in the town to see impact and, a third party neutral study, being done on that work. So I think if we could reference that in that section would be good. Oh, sorry. Speaking of which, on page 4, I wondered if the 2 new stabilization funds merit their own subsection and maybe even a little bit further explication, just because that is such a key part of, capital planning is the capital stabilization fund. And of course, the reparations fund is also, somewhat complex. So might merit its own section. And I think, as others have said, we really need to reinforce the importance of those reserves as being dedicated reserves to their, respective areas. And then the last thing that I wanted to add for now was on page 7. Oh, no, I just, Bob had asked about the capital inventory, and I thought page 7, you were trying to address that on page 7 in terms of the vacant buildings, but maybe that needs a little bit, just 1 or 2 more sentences for oomph. Thanks.
okay, thank you. We want to try and focus on things that will require a little bit more discussion. So next question that I have is, I know that from prior conversations that Alicia has to leave before, I think at 4 o'clock. Are there other members that have time limits? And is the first question. And then the second question I'll get to Alicia directly on, which is, of the items that have been identified, are there ones that you want to make sure are high priority so that they're discussed while you're present? So first question was, anybody else know that they have a time limit? Michelle?
Just giving
I
you a
have-
slight heads up because I'm about to talk in a second. No, it's okay, not yet. They're asking one question, but then they're
I have to jump onto my phone at 4:40 and then we'll have to be off at 5.
Okay, well, I'm hoping we can get done by 5, but that's helpful. And we know that there's at least the one item that you had raised, not automatically, therefore we'll need to bear that in mind. Alicia?
thank you, Andy. I apologize for that. I am at after school right now, so I didn't mean to unmute myself. But I think that I agree with, and I would like all of the things that have been raised so far, but I would like to specifically be a part of the conversation with maintenance, with the maintenance of other, what Bob brought up, and as well as the conversation surrounding craft.
Okay. So Lynn, does that give you enough of a sense of how to order it? And then if so, we should just go. The first item.
Yes, it does. Let me just mention that, dear, I'm trying to find the section. On page 3, the second paragraph, I recognize what you're saying, and personally, I agree with it, but I also think we need to acknowledge that this is not the desire of many people, of several people in our town, to expand growth downtown. Okay, that's all. But yes, I have plenty for us to go through.
We'll add the new growth question to the list, but go ahead and let's work through our issues.
Right. So I guess one of the first questions that I have is, how do you want to deal with Kathy's overall reorganization comments?
I don't know if Kathy, some of it, I would probably, and Kathy has to use her judgment as to what she thinks should be discussed at today's meeting, because she can send her edits, and if they don't change substantive policy, but it's a question of the order of presentation, which is some of what I heard you talking about, Kathy, then you can send me your markup draft, and I can try and work that in with any revisions that follow from today's meeting. So trying to separate out order of items from substance. If you think that there's a substantive matter that should be omitted or stated more strongly, why don't you clarify for us? That would be to answer Lynn's question.
Okay, some of mine are more what you just said, Andy. Just I found you stating something more than once, and I was trying to figure out the best place to state it. Sometimes you introduce it and then state it later, but I can send you those. But what is substantive? When I prefer stronger wording if we are all in agreement for the stronger wording. So Bernie, last time, what I heard you say, Bernie, is we're not going to be in a position to start up anything new until we secure what we've got going. And I wanted to state that strongly at the beginning, and then in the expenditures, point out that we've taken on some big initiatives, and that's where the multi-year, so it's stating that more strongly. Then there was one statement on page, it's page 2, when you're talking about the financial indicator report, where you say there are a couple areas that you would change. I think the sentence you put in is on our expenditures per capita, that we're low. Then you say it's largely because we have a large student population living on campuses that don't pay taxes or adequately support the town financially. I don't think that's the reason the expenditures per person are low. I understood you were trying to introduce that we've got a big part of our population that isn't contributing, but that's not necessarily why the expenditures are low. And if we did per capita on school, we're high. It's the rest of town we're low. If Sean broke out those two, so that's a sentence I would just kind of delete a couple of things. I wouldn't make that statement. That wasn't a concern I had with the indicators. But I thought maybe those comparisons were misleading for people. So it might be, there might be a different way of framing it.
I think there was discussion at the last meeting about some of the financial indicators, and just the comment about expenditures comparing.
I agree with you. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, I just, let me finish. So I added that as I thought about it, because if we have a larger population because of the university, and let's face it, we do, than we otherwise would, because we're counting all these people who are living on campus but get counted in the census, then that naturally is going to put us lower compared to other communities. To say, hey, we're lower compared to other communities, that's just a piece of what gets us there.
I agree with that math. It's the rest of the sentence that says it's because they don't pay taxes or adequately support the town financially. That is the clause that I'm saying. So if you're saying that we could be divided by 25,000 rather than 40,000, but I'm going, but when I get underneath the numbers, the reason, if we have a large student population, the reason we might be low is we're spending a lot less on schools. And that's not true. What we're spending less on is the rest of town. So I just, it does artificially decrease it. So I would just reword that. Because if what you're trying to say is that our long-term residents aren't 40, we're dividing by a big number, if that's what you're trying to say there. But
Andy, can I just add quickly too?
Yeah.
So I think you're right, Kathy. I will say it is a unique challenge to Amherst. It's not just that we're divided by a larger number. It's that we do also have expenses associated with serving a larger number that we don't get revenues from that group. EMT, public safety, or police, EMS services, some educational services, DPW and roads and infrastructure. All, serving a larger population has real costs for all those areas that we don't get sort of the proportional revenue to support. And again, all of that was to try to explain how we can have a really low expenditure per capita, but also have a high tax rate, is because of that sort of uniqueness to Amherst that really, I can't think of any other communities in Massachusetts that have it at such a great effect.
I completely agree with what you just said. So I would use that to explain why our tax rate is so high. That we have these needs and it's not supported by a big base. I'm just saying that it's not the reason per se that the expenditures per capita are low. It was this phrasing. So I think the statement Sean just made should be made strongly, and it goes with Michelle saying that we're weaker than we might be about the strategic partnerships, that we've got a large group of people that are receiving services that aren't fully paying for it. So it's just the wording of this didn't read right to me, but some of my.
No, that's helpful.
Okay, so the I also, you kind of introduced that maybe we would consider an override on operating, and I would rather just leave it out. I don't think anyone's proposing that. And I think later you say we've not done one, and there are good reasons why for capital. So most of my others are just where we say different things. I found we said it, I would move it around a little bit. That's it. So I
Okay.
can send them, those are more edits. And if people want to go page by page, I can call a few things out and I'll stop.
Bernie?
Yeah, I think Kathy just answered what I was, or what I was heading, where I was heading, which is we should, at this point, fall through the document where she has substantive changes to make. And I value Kathy's opinion. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it in writing in front of me. I wish we had it. Where we come to a section where she's got substantial opinions, we can have a discussion about that. I certainly would agree with her that we need to get to section 1 or some others. We need to toughen it up a little bit in terms of, we need a year to catch our breath at least. If we could just like move through, that would be fine. If that seems, that seems reasonable.
Okay.
Okay. Then it seems to me, given the time, Andy, that we should probably go to the discussion about CRESS and also the discussion about facilities, given Alicia's deadline.
Okay. Thank you.
So if you call out those pages, Lynn, I'll scroll to mine. I've got it.
I can show you on the screen. It's up to whether people want to be seen or not seen. That's all.
Which is on page 6, I believe.
I think CRESS appears on 6, is right?
CRESS appears on 6, definitely.
So we probably should focus on that paragraph first. The facilities is the second piece.
So I think Alicia,
I was going to say facilities is on the next page.
okay, so we're going to start with CRESS and then go to facilities.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So we're going to put it on the screen or just leave it, let people look at their own copies.
I'll be glad to put it on the screen. I
You know, it's up to, does anybody want it on the screen? I
Well,
think everybody has their own copy.
yeah,
So go ahead.
anything would be fine. I'm going to listen to Alicia. My one comment here, Alicia, was I wanted to add a sentence that as the workload grows, we need to assess how it's working. Because we really need to know what's being shifted, what more can be shifted. So I just had added a very simple sentence to that effect. And we had talked about it at the last meeting. And we can't really assess it till it's fully operational, till we get everybody up and working. So I would add a sentence, and that was my one comment on that section.
Alicia, you're welcome to comment if not, or not, it's up to you.
Thank you. So just full transparency and disclosure, I have not had time to go back and listen to the meeting that I did not attend. So if anything is repetitive or if there are things that have already been discussed, I apologize, and that may be the reason. But essentially, I was looking for something very similar to what Kathy said in terms of like a system for organization and assessment.
Okay. Sean has his hand up, but I actually have a comment on this too.
Okay, Sean.
Two things. So I think in terms of the comment about assessment evaluation, that makes sense. I guess, again, the question is that a goal or a budget guideline, or both? Maybe if there's budgetary impacts. We do have a grant that's a requirement of. So it's going to happen. It's just whether you think it needs to be in the budget guidelines versus goals. The other section, I guess, reading this closer, I just maybe that there should be clarification. It says CREST cannot be funded entirely by reductions in funding for the police department. And so that sort of implies it can be funded in part by reductions in the police department. And I guess the question is that looking retroactive to what's already happened in the past, or is that indicating that should be considered in the future? And I think that should be really clear if that sentence is going to be left in the guidelines.
Okay. Yeah, I can tell you what my intent was when doing it. And some of it was that this came out of using the prior last year's guidelines and editing off of that. But so the reduction, but I guess it's additional reductions in the police department beyond what was previously made or something, but that was the intent of it in any event. Because we would need an evaluation in the end is what is the, based upon experience, what's the required size of both departments and how do we get there? So I'm going to let Alicia go back and see if could follow up on that very narrow piece and then continue with the other three people with hands up. Alicia?
Thank you. First, I just have a really quick question. So was there a previous cut to the police budget that went to CREST?
Yes.
And that was the 130?
Yeah, that was the original. Yep, that was part of the first year that we funded a couple positions in CREST that ultimately didn't start in time, but there were some vacant positions that were not filled in the police department.
Okay, thank you. So if I can really just quickly just also speak to the prior topic in response to Sean's comment, I was hoping to see it as a guideline, especially moving forward in terms of the assessment, just because I think that the results of said assessment, once they can happen, should be a guideline for how we invest in those things moving forward, if that makes sense. So I think that's how I was hoping to see that used. And then just jumping back to CREST really quickly, I also wanted clarification on what exactly we meant by that line. And so like if there were any thoughts about that for moving forward as well.
Andy, can I respond to that real quick?
Yeah.
So I think what Alicia said, I completely agree with. I wonder, the sentence before it says the size of both departments will be adjusted in future years based on experience. I wonder if you can leave it at that and remove the next sentence because it's, it says the same thing. It seems to imply it. And I think it's consistent with what Alicia just said about the evaluation system and using that as a determining factor in the future.
Okay, Matt?
Oh, I think we're kind of fine tuning this sentence, but since we're here, as what I was indicating earlier, when I made my comment about the study is, and I appreciate Alicia and Sean for honing in on it. I think that sentence, based upon experience, I would encourage us as a guideline to, to base the size of the departments on the implementation study and in, usage data, response data. I might just be a little bit more specific than based on experience.
Bernie?
Going to very quickly agree that it should be made clear in the document that community response and police are in collaboration, not in competition with each other, either for service or for funding. And what we need to do is find a good balance based on data and then build that. So.
Yeah, I'm going to say just make one point, then get to Lynn. Some of what I was doing was quite honestly, reacting off of also what we heard at the forum. And I think we all were at the forum and know what the comments were that were received, or I reported them to the committee previously, but Lynn?
Yeah, I want to really echo what I'm hearing from some people. The decision about CRES should be based on evaluation data. The decision about policing should be based on policing data. I do not, I'm not saying that I don't see CRES taking some load from police. Frankly, what I think we're going to see is an increase in demand for the kinds of CRES services, which are more like social services than, and from everything I have been able to tell from discussions of this, is we can barely at this point staff 24/7 with the police force we have. So I want to put the measure of how we assess this, the CRES against the CRES evaluation and the police against policing standards, and not sound as if it's playing one off the other.
Yeah, we can clarify that, and I certainly will work to do that. One of the things that we heard a lot at the forum is comments about we need to make CRES 24/7. And I'm not sure that there's agreement to that until we see whether there's enough of a demand for 24/7 to make it 24/7. And that's a
It's also, Andy, I think this is stated well right now. I would delete the sentence that Sean deleted, because I think in terms of peak load too, we may have afternoons, evenings, there are different times of day or times of the week. And that's all part of, we will know a lot more once CRES is part of our regular response task force. That's when you assess, how many things happen at 3 a.m. versus 9 o'clock at night, and does anything happen on Monday morning? I just that hopefully is what we're, and Lynn, I'm agreeing with you. It's both workforces. I mean, you don't, EMS staffs up for Friday and Saturday nights, particularly when UMass is here.
Yeah,
We don't make as many trips to the hospital on the weekends once they're not here, when they're not here, or when they weren't here at all. So, I mean, we should be, this will inform how we staff in the future. This is a pretty critical year, FY24, Sean. So that's why I think it kind of belongs in here, but written correctly, because it's going to inform these future years. And we're saying steady as we go for 24, since you've somehow miraculously figured out how to pay for it all.
Yeah, there's one other piece of data which we haven't mentioned. That is, should we know whether dispatch is identifying calls at times when there's not CRES response available, and because that might be useful information also. Lynn, did you have anything else?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Lisa?
Andy, can I just respond to your comment real quick? One thing we are working on with CRES, I've been talking with Earl about, is the service levels that they put in their budget document, because I know the finance committee reviews those very closely, and that's a key piece of information that's discussed in May. So if there is suggested or recommended service levels, I don't know if it belongs in the budget guidelines, but you can certainly email those over and we can, I work with Earl to kind of develop what that baseline, this will be sort of the first year of baseline data or half year of baseline data. Once we set it, we don't really want to change it very much. So we want to make sure we get it right in terms of what's important for putting in that document. So again, if anybody has any suggested, we can't do too much, but if anybody has any suggested benchmarks they want us to try to capture and report on an annual basis, we can try to get it into that that service level data.
Bernie? Or it's not Bernie, Alicia, I'm sorry. Alicia, your hand is up first.
Thank you, Andy. So a couple of things. Essentially, I agree with most of the comments that came prior. I want to emphasize Matt's comments, however, in regards to the specificity of like what kind of information we'll be utilizing to make these decisions. I think it would be important to put that language in there if possible. And then also in response to what Sean said, I was hoping that I might be able to send over some of the benchmarks that I would hope to see information on and hopefully also be a part of that decision. And then in regards to the CREST funding, I would also like to see that line taken out. I don't think it's really needed. I think it makes it a little bit more confusing. And while I think the goal is to have CREST be, operating 24/7, I don't think we're quite there yet. So I would like to see the data in terms of, peak hours. And then I also just don't think, again, I think this would be an important question for Earl to really confirm, but I don't think we're at a place with responder levels with the same number of responders that we could increase to 24 hours. And so I think that there should be a discussion before increasing the amount of time that CREST is operating about increasing staffing, like before we have that conversation. So I think that those things would be important. I also think that in terms of funding CREST and the PD, I also just don't like the language that seems to sort of like pit them against each other. Because while I hope that they will work together and they're both a part of our public safety services, they're two separate departments. And so again, like everyone else said, we want to make sure that the needs of the departments are being met independently of what the other one is having going on. And so I personally, though, do support moving some funding from the PD to CREST upon the evaluation, if that is what's indicated. Because I think when the CREST department came up with from the CSWG, the idea was that CREST would be taking on some things that used to be handled by the PD. And so that those, like the funding that would back those sort of things might be able to be moved over. Again, I think we would need data to be able to prove that that would be the case. But I also think that the other intention for CREST was that for people who don't call the PD. So I think that there will be like a number of calls that the PD wouldn't have been necessarily responding to before. And so that funding would have to come for or should come from somewhere else. And that we also want to make sure that if the number of calls that goes to the PD is the same, because again, I think that people who called the PD before and wanted PD response will continue to call the PD and want PD response, that those calls can still be answered as well. So again, I say all of this just to say that I think the data is going to be extremely important in making these decisions, making informed decisions moving forward. And so I think I just want to focus more specifically on what exact kind of data we'll be looking at and how we'll be making those determinations, because I think there are like a number of different ways that that could happen. So to be very clear about that so that it doesn't get sticky moving forward.
Yeah, just to acknowledge, I really appreciate this conversation. It probably was an error in doing one thing, and that is thinking too hard about comments we received at the forum as I wrote this. And I think that we all know what comments I'm referring to that were made from certain people about we need to make this 24/7 and we can afford to do it if we take this other action. Bernie?
Yeah, none of this is none of this search for data requires anything really new. I mean, cities have been doing scoping like this for a decade or more. And so there's probably plenty of models out there that we can look at and choose from. I know that we have a very sophisticated fire EMS group that uses numbers a lot to determine how to best staff. They're a prototype of it. We've got probably a lot of, because we run our own dispatch, we can generate our own data from that. So we've got some advantages here, and we really should be asking ourselves, what does the data tell us, and not getting caught up in the latest and greatest movement. Let the data speak for itself as to what's required. And if you look at other organizations, the classic one being Cahoots, which is actually part of the funded through the police department out there, you're going to see variable impacts, and it'll take us a little bit of time to figure it out. And that's where we should be headed is, and whether we use the Law Enforcement Action Partnership or some other organization or try to do it ourselves, we need to gather data.
Thank you. Lynn, you have now taken your hand down.
I'm done.
Okay. Do you have a next item?
Well, Alicia also wanted to talk about our buildings. I'm quickly looking. Alicia, you have
a particular paragraph, Alicia, that caught your eye that you needed to talk about?
If we can start with Matt, and I will get back to you very quickly.
Okay.
Hey, Matt.
So, Lynn, this might be a topic that you want to shuffle into your larger structural, organizing thing. In other words, I know Alicia's on the time crunch and wants to talk about the capital. So, we need to, but I just want to recommend that these guidelines explicitly speak to the funding level of the Jones. When I ask around my neighborhood and sort of folks in town, I think there's a lot of anxiety about sort of the unknown costs of the Jones. And my understanding, and the truth is I could be misunderstanding, but my understanding as a member of this committee is that the town has had one commitment to the Jones project all along, and that there hasn't been any real meaningful push for that number to change. And so if I'm right about that, and I think that I am, I really think these guidelines are a great place to really clarify that, because I have to say, and I think this just because it's such a complex project with so many different potential and actual funding sources, folks are really, there's a pretty strong sentiment around table this Jones project. We can't afford it. And I think, those folks really just genuinely are overwhelmed by the information that they see about the project. And I think we owe it to them to be clear about what the town's commitment is to that project. And that there's no interest, at least as far as I'm aware, there's no interest in deviating from the number that the town is committing to off the rolls.
I just want to affirm that the vote of the council to absolutely confirms what you're observing and saying, that we made one commitment and that is all we have committed and that is all we have continued to commit. And there is, at some point, if they can't come up with the additional fundraising, then we look for a different option, not an option that includes town funds. But what I'm hearing from you is you feel that needs to be a statement in here that affirms that statement or that vote from the council.
Yeah, and I think maybe finance could, provide some language or provide a platform to not only reaffirm that, but also, I realize this is guidance for the town councilor and the town manager and Sean, but also sort of hedging our bets or outlining our strategy in terms of the four major projects, and that, increasing town funds into the Jones is really not a sustainable way to get these four projects done. Thank you.
Yeah, Sean?
Just along the lines of what Matt said, and I think you may have raised this earlier about the capital stabilization fund. Again, yeah, it may be helpful guidance to hear from this committee on your views on the capital stabilization fund, and specifically whether you believe we should continue to grow it to support the projects. I think that would be a helpful statement if it's the way the committee feels.
Wonder if we can do that until we see the next round of the model going forward. Well, I will look at that as to whether we can add that sentence, not for the council, because the council's already adopted the policy that we're talking about. But again, since it's both a public document and guidance for the manager and budget development, we can add it there. It's not necessary for the second purpose, but for the public purpose it is. So I'll go back. Kathy?
Yeah, I think what I heard Matt say, but I actually had a sentence that tried to say that is when we just, on the library, that when we just gave the library a year until the fall for to both come up with other money, see whether we can cut it back, the understanding was, or we're going to have to go to a scale back version, that we're not going up to the 50 million. So I thought we should add a sentence to it. So right now it just says we voted on this in April 2021. Well, we also just voted on it again to give it another year of life. And so that's where I would add a sentence there to make it clear that the underlying assumption is that if it can't be done without increasing the town share, we're going back to a plan B, whatever plan B is. So that was, I had wanted to put something more in there because it sounded like we were full systems go the way it's currently written, that we voted on it in 2021 and so did the voters vote on it. But this clearly was a big issue this year with the news about the costs. A big issue for the library trustees as well as us, not just us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the understanding was that when we had the most recent vote, we were reconfirming that our commitment is the amount we voted in 21 and that we were not increasing that amount and had no intention.
Right. And
increasing
so I
that
just I'll send you in the sentence, you see who does it, because we did vote again on this is my point. It wasn't that we think, so it's not just that no matter what the costs are. So.
And let me just add to that. I think there could be a reference to the MOU that the council authorized the town manager to negotiate, because it also includes in it actually the preparation, if you will, for that possibility of falling back to Plan B.
Yep.
Okay.
Alicia?
Thank you. So I also just want to emphasize that I would also like to see that language included in terms of what our commitment is or was, just for more clarity. I think the parts of this, well, actually, sorry, a really quick question before. Are we finalizing this document tonight?
No, what's going to happen is, though, if we're going to get it to the council for next week, which was what our assignment was, that I would have to work on a revision after this meeting and as quickly as possible, probably using Kathy's help now because she has so much on her version, and then send it back to you as a draft 2, and for not meeting again, but inviting comments from committee members back to me on draft, on what will be draft 2. And I'll just have to take those comments and work to develop essentially what will be draft 3, which is what's will then go to the council.
And Alicia, that will come to the council as a draft on the 5th. We will not vote on the 5th. We will give input, and then it comes back to the finance committee for one more review, and then comes back to the council. And hopefully on December 19th, we will approve the memo. With that caveat that if we haven't been able to meet with the schools and the library, that we might have to bring it back up again.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. So I just have a couple of comments, not all of which necessarily include revisions to this document, but I just thought it would be helpful to bring up first the debt exclusion override. And I know this document is essentially for the council, most of whom would probably understand this, but I'm more thinking about community members who may be reading this and might want some more information on the debt exclusion override, because it has like one sentence surrounding it. And I don't know, I think that that's going to be a huge event occurring in 2023 and will very much affect a lot of our budget and what we can do moving forward. And so I think that maybe, I don't know, thinking about providing education or more explanation to public starting as soon as possible so that we can sort of gear people up for that action to occur is something that I'd be looking for. And then I just have 2 other comments in the first 2 paragraph sections that just I was a little bit uncomfortable with. And so I think the last part of the first paragraph where it says it's not clear that the town will have the capacity to start any new major capital building projects for many years, including renovation of the Wildwood building after it is no longer needed for educational purposes. I'm wondering if that needs to be in the guidelines only because it's like, while it may be true, it's also sort of speculation. Like, we have not made that decision. And I think those things, we're still getting more information on those things. And I know Sean has been working on the budget presentation that he showed us, had some mention of some of these things and the possibilities, but I don't think any decisions have been made there. And so I'm wondering if that language is necessary to include. And so then because of that, I would also be looking down in the next paragraph. Where it says, sorry, give me a second to find it again. The amount generated by nope, sorry, wrong. If there is no likely future use, it might be wiser to sell them. I'm also just wondering if we need that specific sentence as well, because I think the town, the surplus real property disposition policy that will guide the decisions will make that decision, and that we may not need to include that language because I think it is making presumptions about decisions and conversations we have not yet had.
Those were conversations from the last meeting that unfortunately you were not there, able to be there. But I just want to note that those 2 sentences were directly from our last conversation.
Andy, I just want to mention that since I was one of the people that pushed this, what I'm hearing from Alicia is that she feels that the committee that looks at property should meet before we make a statement about this, so that it's premature to make the statement, not premature to have the committee look at it. And I agree with that. I think the committee needs to look at our buildings and either decide, and recommend, what we might sell off or what we might do with properties or whatever before we make explicit statements.
So when you're
Thank
referring to the 3rd paragraph, the sentence, if there's no likely future use, it might be wiser to sell them.
Yes,
That sentence.
yes.
I just want to say, I actually did an edit to sell them or pursue a public-private partnership and, to come up with a plan. It's not just what we should do with disposition, but a plan. We could be pretty creative with our properties.
I
So-
like come up with a plan. But
Come up
without
with a
saying
plan,
what.
come up with a plan, so and I think FY '24 is a good year to do it. So Sean's question on why is this in the guidelines, these become a liability to us if we just sit on them. Someone will walk in and the ceiling will fall on their head and so we need to have a plan.
Sean, you,
Yeah, I don't know. It depends whether you take it out or not. I will say a critical issue is whether or not we are going to maintain Wildwood going forward. Maybe not for FY '24 specifically, but for the out years and especially for the 5-year capital improvement program. If we are going to maintain Wildwood going forward, there's a whole bunch of capital costs that need to be brought back into that capital improvement program that are not currently there. So I do like to know, or I think the town manager would like to know how the finance committee feels on the future of Wildwood and whether or not we should be continuing to plan for those capital costs or not. I think I've shared my thoughts that the way costs are rising and interest rates are rising, I don't see how we make progress on the 4 building projects and invest in that building long term without making some other major changes. So I think it's just the finance committee's input on that would be really helpful as we develop that 5-year capital improvement program.
So, but that seems to me to reinforce the idea that we look at these properties, all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And sooner rather than later.
And not put it in the guidelines here, but put that high on we need to talk about this over the next X months, correct?
And when GOL meets tomorrow about goals, that's one of the things I'm going to want to see in the town manager's goals is looking at our properties.
And Andy, if I might just speak one more time because I have to head out. So thank you, Lynn, because that clarification was exactly what I was trying to go with. And so I also just agree with Kathy in terms of, I'm just saying that I think, and Sean, I think that these conversations need to be had, but I just don't think we have an affirmative decision yet. And so I just think we should not put anything about it like specific in the guidelines until that decision has been made. And so like once we have that decision and we can say like affirmatively, this is what we plan to do, that we can add that to the guidelines. And like Kathy said, I'm not sure that would even be in these guidelines for the next fiscal year. So I just don't think that it benefits us to have that language in here right now. And also thank you all for your time. I do have to head out now, but I also really appreciate you all moving the conversation around so that I could be a part of things that are important to me.
yeah, well, thank you. I'm sorry that you're having to leave. Bob?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate my comments from last time, which is that I do think we ought to at least talk about expanding our capital inventory to include all the buildings. And, there's a focus here on the surplus buildings, but there's other buildings that we have that aren't surplus, and we have to maintain them as well. And so I think an inventory where we really look at what the maintenance requirements are over time and, try to put a price tag on it. And I know that's effort, and maybe we don't do it other than very qualitatively initially. But I mean, we need to know what are we signing up for 5 years from now, 10 years from now in the buildings that we already have. I mean, there's surplus buildings, yes, but there's also other buildings that we need. So that's my point. My point is, let's not be surprised 5 years from now that we all of a sudden discover we've got a big expense. We should know that that's coming so we can plan for it.
Sean, isn't that a process underway?
Yeah, so the more I hear Bob articulate what he meant by his original comments. So there is a sort of a comprehensive facility by facility review that I think, I don't know if it was a town council goal or I know it was somewhere that the facility department has begun. It's a very intensive process to do it at the, to get to the granular detail that's helpful to know, how long a heating system will last or how long a cooling system will before it has to be replaced. But that is currently in the, in the planning for the next, as soon as we can get it done, is to update a facility. It's not so much an inventory, but the last person to do it was Ron Bahanowitz, our facility director, back around 2015, did a building by building evaluation. And so we're working on doing an update of that. It'll probably be some time before the next update is done, but it is underway.
Okay, well, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, and I had some, just a minor edit on this, Bob, addressing it, because the other thing is because I'm sitting on that joint capital planning committee, you can see Jeremiah is going through building by building, the outside, the inside, and for some buildings like the Crocker Farm School, he's got 10 years worth of an investment on when are we going to do this piece of it and that piece, and he's starting to do it with the police, so he's doing it with all the major town. So I think trying to cross-reference it so people don't think that it doesn't exist at all, but we need to be doing this.
Yeah,
So it was kind of impressive what that one school was going to take.
Yeah, I know. Well, maybe we just put something in the language in here to say that we'll use this information to, in future guidelines or something like that.
Right.
Okay. I just think we want to make sure that people understand I'm sure the council understands this, but I think we need to communicate this, that we do have these buildings that need maintenance and we can't forego maintenance just because we don't want to spend the money this year. It's, when you need a new roof on your house, you need a new roof on your house, so anyway, that's all.
Okay. Matt?
Thanks, Andy. So related, and I think we may need to sort of divide out the school question from this capital inventory conversation. I just flipped through this several times because I was like, I know that he addressed the school override, Fort River override.
Yeah.
But I read through it, there's 2 or 3 references where you make that reference as one clause in a sentence, like we don't want to do a operations override. I would argue that the school vote in May merits a paragraph of its own in here with some considerations for strategy, overall planning. And I certainly take Bob's, good point around the need for an overall inventory. That being said, some of you all might remember when I joined the finance committee, my motivation for joining this committee was, how are they going to do this? I moved from to town when councilors are doing this roadshow on these 4 capital projects. And I really wanted to just, from a learning perspective, be a part of this committee and see the work and see I hate the term, the sausage being made, but, see how this work was done. And so to me, number one, I would say that just from a messaging perspective, the override vote for the school needs its own paragraph and should be, there's a lot of work to be done there, communications wise and others. But I would also say that, part of the way that we actually could build all 4 of these, and the school in particular, was to, reduce our capital and operating costs from those school buildings, from 3 to 2, 3 elementary to 2. And so, I think that there is, obviously Wildwood sits within the inventory question, but I think it also, at least from my experience, sits within the larger strategic question of how are we going to do all this stuff. So that's, I guess I'm advocating for a paragraph.
Okay. Anything else here? Not Lynn.
Well, maybe it's not here, but it's related because when it we talk about going out to future budgets, I think that we specifically are going to want to see from the schools the impact of moving the 6th grade, which will be within this next fiscal year, and then actually 3 fiscal years out, I believe. Kathy, somebody else correct me if I'm wrong. We won't see the benefit of having 2 elementary schools instead of 3. But at some point, we should start seeing that in projecting out budgets. My concern is that we'll realize savings, but they won't be seen as savings to the whole town. They'll only be seen as savings that the school can go spend that money elsewhere. And that may be the way we go at the time. But I think I'm among the group of people who would like to see some savings in general.
Anyone else?
So, I mean, that's all the way down in your second to last section, called planning for the future.
Yes, okay. What do you have, Lynn, as the next item that we should take up?
Okay, so let me just go back up to the top. I think we've covered the reorganization. We've talked about the Jones Library. We've talked about a school override paragraph. We've talked about relationship to the university, although I don't think we've come
Oh,
back.
we haven't. So maybe
Yeah.
we should have it turn to Michelle
Okay.
now for that discussion, because she also has.
Yeah, and let me try to find that section very quickly before we jump. I got it.
Okay, Michelle.
So what I'm questioning here is, I guess, a broader discussion about how we are thinking about our relationship with the higher ed institutions. And I heard, so I think Kathy may have assumed that what I was saying was maybe a little different than what I am saying. So I think that we, as I said earlier, have seen that whatever guidance we're providing to the town manager on this matter may not necessarily be getting us where we want to be. And I feel like the town council needs to have a broader discussion about how we're approaching this. And in particular, and this came up in the discussion of town manager goals, looking at what role does the council play when it comes to advocating for the maximum amount of pilot, asking our delegation, Mindy and Joe, to advocate at the state level for the maximum amount of pilot. So what I'm really trying to do is determine who is responsible for what in this puzzle, so what should the council be doing? What should the town manager be doing with respect to the partnership agreements? And what should the university be doing? And so I'm not sure how, I feel like whatever guidance we've been providing is not getting us to where we need to go. And so I'd like to think about reframing the way we're thinking about this and reframing the guidance that we're giving to the town manager and the finance department. And I know that's a bigger discussion. And so I guess I'm looking to Lynn to really help navigate how we might have that bigger discussion.
Yeah, let me ask one question, my own,
Sure.
and then turn it to Lynn. And that is, are you thinking about, since you're also chairing GOL is talking about the question of the goals. Is this part of the goals discussion that's happening at GOL? And if so, should the finance committee should just be referring to that process and not trying to recreate the process?
Yeah, the town, I think that we will be discussing this in GOL as part of the town manager goals, and looking at if we're, so just for the benefit of the non-voting resident members, we're looking at splitting the town manager goals so that we're more clear on what town council policies are versus what the sort of management goals for the town manager are. And so that we can really clarify our roles and be more productive and take more ownership over our particular roles. And so one of those items that we'll be discussing is the goal that's been there of the partnership agreements with the universities. And so, but I still am uncomfortable with the framing of the language as it stands right now. And like I said, I wanted to try to get some language over to you before the meeting, but I wasn't able to. So I'm not sure how to reconcile that at this point.
I'll come back to that in a minute. Lynn?
I think Michelle's making a very appropriate statement. This is not something the council has discussed in terms of what is our role with regard to these relationships and the negotiations. And I think if nothing else, it needs to be discussed so there's a better understanding of roles. And maybe some new ideas come out of that discussion as well. And my sense would be that the time for that discussion may be when we see a MOA from UMass. And also as we talk about the goals. So I'm, I think there's a somehow or another, I don't know that we reflect it in this document as much as we do in the goals documents.
Thank you. Lynn, the MOA, do you mean the strategic partnership agreement?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just clarifying that.
I'll just, as a former member of the select board, report to you that this has been a town manager goal for quite a while. Even when we had a select board, the select board was the executive branch of government and employed the town manager to assist it with its work as the executive. We always delegated the negotiation of strategic partnership to the town manager. And so it sort of has been pretty much of a non-role for other parts of the community because, and I think the feeling has been throughout that it's easier for one person to be in charge of negotiations than a whole body that has to meet in public and has to comply with open meeting law. Bernie.
Yeah, the caution here is who speaks for the community. And I think the councilors have to be careful about voicing their opinions. And that, the pushback that we got from the chancellor is a case in point. So if the town manager is going to negotiate memorandum of agreements with UMass, in particular, Amherst College in New Hampshire, his alma mater, it needs to be the town manager and not people making individual statements at different times. Be a different story when you get the MOA in front of you and then you can critique it. I would just be careful about doing that. And using the term pilot, by the way, is toxic for nonprofits, tax exempts like Amherst College and and the like. I refer people to the Lincoln Land Institute's very comprehensive book on payments in lieu of taxes. And they've got some suggestions in there for approaches to help pull this together. I would strike the sentence about Burlington and the University of Vermont. It's another state, for one, and for two, Vermont had some very particular instructions to municipalities as to how you can calculate the value of state property and what you're losing, which is a feature that we don't have in Massachusetts.
Kathy?
I'm not sure I would strike that sentence, Bernie, as much as maybe move it to a later section. And Michelle, I know you said you would like to write language. What this doesn't have is what Vermont has. They have a state legislative action that is supporting the local municipality. And we don't have that paragraph here saying we're on record with a
Right.
resolution supporting it as a council, but saying that this isn't just sending our executive in. And I think of it as bargaining from a position of weakness and saying, what might you like, strong arguments, but what can you give us? But as saying, is there something that could be more powerful? So I just would insert a sentence, a little paragraph, advocate that Amherst should advocate for statewide efforts to enact legislation.
Yeah.
And then I could move such as that helped Burlington, because that is what was helpful to Burlington.
Back when Claire Higgins was mayor of Northampton, she proposed, and some of us responded affirmatively to her, and then she went on to greater glory, that we take the communities in the state, and there's probably 20 or so that are in the same situation as Amherst, where the Commonwealth has substantial amounts of non-taxable properties, and that those 20 communities then form a core of taking action in terms of moving the legislature, because you're bumping up against some very powerful forces here. The University of Cambridge, as the original state constitution referred to it, is one party that doesn't like this. And they pull a lot of strings, as does the other of our town managers' alma mater, MIT. So, forming a network, forming a statewide network does help move things along. And it also gives you a broader legislative delegation than just our senator and our rep. And that's something where, the council can play a role in talking to the governing bodies in those other communities and doing some one-to-one interface there to help this matter along. But in terms of negotiating, the town manager does negotiation. I agree that it's from a position of weakness.
Kathy?
No, that was it. I didn't take my hand down, sorry.
Okay. Lynn?
To be exact, there's 29 municipalities with this problem, because there's 29 public higher ed institutions, and that doesn't count for other state ones. And I think that one of the things that needs to be recognized here, because we're not going to solve this tonight, and that is that how we deal with private institutions is different from how we deal with public. The private institutions, there has been legislation introduced in the past about nonprofits, which they are. And frankly, the moment you mention that group, the very healthy health network in Massachusetts, which also is a backbone of nonprofits, rears their head. And so that's one thing, but the legislation for public land is a different piece of legislation. And it has to be separated out in terms of how we go after both pieces. And I literally was working for the University of Massachusetts the last time the nonprofit one reared its head and was asked to do a piece of quick research, but it died, so we never did the research.
You, Michelle?
I just really wanted to support everything that's been said. I wanted to clarify that I absolutely agree with Bernie that, you know, what the town manager does in terms of the strategic partnership agreements is for the town manager to do, and then maybe for us to respond to. But this piece about, working, maybe even as Bernie suggested and I think absolutely, as Bernie suggested, in coalition with other communities to try to get the state legislation, to push the state legislation to get the maximum amount, is something that as a council, I would really like to see us discuss and strategize about making that a priority. With so many things that we have as priorities right now, I think this one would be a really solid way for us to advance the goals that we have. So, thanks.
So what I think I'm hearing is separate out the nonprofit colleges from the university and actually make it two separate pieces that are more appropriate for each, as opposed to trying to run them together, and that we look to the what comes out of GOL tomorrow and make sure that we're consistent and possibly even just referring to GOL's work and talk about the need for more revenue because of the amount of tax exempt land, and then refer to the GOL piece and not get into it at all. So there's two things that are, and of course, there's been good points made about the different strategies that you apply to the two different kinds of institutions that, you know, that goes without saying. I've had to deal with that in other contexts. So is there anything more to say on this topic? Does our list have more?
Yes, I'm going to skip over the new growth question because I think we'd be here all night on that one. Do you want to discuss the issue about, do we want to grow our stabilization fund?
In which stabilization fund? Both?
I believe it was the capital stabilization fund.
Where is that, Lynn? What page?
It is page 3 at the bottom. We get into general budgeting policy, and Sean raised the issue about stabilization and free cash. And see, so let me just start, since I think it's a good question. When we say, do we want to grow it? I think what we want to do is make sure that we continue to identify appropriate funds that go into capital, and recognize that that fund itself may go up and down. So it may never look like it's growing, but we may be continually adding into it, but expending out of it. So for me, the question is, do we want to continue to have a separate stabilization fund for capital versus operating? And my answer is absolutely.
And Lynn, maybe can I clarify quickly when I raise that? So what the council's approved, when they approved the capital stabilization fund, I don't know if it was a formal approval, but you sort of, what we presented was our policy will be, if we have a surplus at the end of the year, we maintain 5% in free cash, we maintain 10% in general stabilization for a total of 15% for sort of rainy day reserves. We honor our commitment to the reparations fund, building that up based on what's been agreed to. And then anything above and beyond that would go into capital stabilization. So I guess, to Andy's point, that policy is sort of there, or at least we've proposed it. The question is really, when we looked at the 4 capital projects and looked at some of the planning last time, there were some options that looked at building the capital stabilization fund so that we could potentially pre-fund or not incur debt for one of the building projects. And I guess the question is, if you don't have to, in this document, if you don't want to, but if there was, if the committee did agree that we should explore that, then maybe say that in the document, if we should continue to grow it so that we don't have to borrow for one of the building projects.
The other is to say that we want to be clear about what our plan is to build the 4 capital buildings and make sure that we have a stabilization fund that is consistent with that plan.
Mhm.
Kathy?
I think that wording is a little better, Sean, what I'm worried about, and I've got a marked up copy that I'm looking at, so I can't even find where I would might put what, but I played with what if, instead of 10.5% into capital this year, what if we were at 10.4 or 10.2? Because what we're doing is squeezing operating budgets, as you well know. And anytime we don't squeeze operating budgets, we've got them starting at a new level the next year. So we need to be thinking that way. So to continually grow something as we use it, to me, would be partly keeping this pressure on. So I'm hoping at some point we can go back to the 10%. You've already got that in your piece. And that 10% would then be doing what Bob is saying is, we've got these buildings, let's keep maintaining them. We could start doing roads again, and we wouldn't have, if we could ever get these 4 buildings done, we wouldn't have a major building. We would just have all the roads and sidewalks and maintenance. But so I'm queasy about stronger wording, even though I love the capital, say this fund. And so I think the policy we have, if we live with it for this year and next year, we can see, particularly with what funding are we going to be able to find for the elementary school, as we grapple with where is what. So I guess I like Andy's that we will assess what we need to do rather than a commitment to put more money into it. Because what you had to do to get it this year was actually, if we look past year, we were really tight the last couple of years, which yielded this free cash for you.
I took what Andy said and I said, we want to be clear about our plan for major, and then I put in parentheses for capital projects, and make sure the stabilization fund is funded and managed consistent with that plan. Something like that. That's all. Going on to the next one. We've already talked about override and being more clear. We kind of clarified that the paragraph where the school committee about BCG. So I don't think we need to do that anymore. We've talked a lot about CRESS. We've talked about our capital inventory. We talked about the Wildwood School, and even that it's a little premature. We've talked about the relationship with higher education. We've talked about Burlington. We're done.
Anything else that done with the list? Is there anything else that people want to talk about that they feel is missing from our discussion today? If not, I want to call for public comment. Why don't we go to public comment then, and indicate to those members of the public who are present that we have a policy of welcoming brief public comment at meetings, and it should be a topic that is within the responsibility of the Finance Committee, but doesn't necessarily have to be about the guidelines. And if anybody would like to make public comment, please raise your hand so that, and then we'll recognize you by bringing you into the meeting and letting you make your comment. so that we can hear what you have to share with us. So pause for a second, waiting to see if anyone raises their hand. All right, seeing no hands raised, and I'll keep an eye on that box to make sure that nobody comes in late with it, but that takes care of the public comment issues. Our next meeting, the way that this is planned to happen, and goes into what our next meeting is, because they're both tied together, is that we're trying to get something together for the council for discussion on December 5th, as indicated earlier. I will do my best to try and turn around quickly edits off of draft 1 that will be draft 2. I asked that Kathy send her suggestions to me to work with, and Lynn, if you have any notes, send them along too. And anybody else who has notes or suggestions, please just email them directly to me. Do not do emails to the group, just send them to me, because we have to be very careful about open meeting law compliance. And then I will turn it around as quickly as I can, so that I can then get your comments back to draft 2, and I will make changes based upon additional comments that come in on draft 2 to draft will be in effect draft 3, which is what will go to the council for the meeting next on December 5th. We do have a meeting coming up a week from today, December 6th, and that was specifically scheduled to be the day after the meeting, so that if there is additional topics that we need to discuss based upon the council meeting, or edits that we need to do based on the council meeting, that we have the opportunity to do them. The council always has the option to make amendments and adopt at the time, though it's usually not a good idea. If it's a lot of changes, it's better to go through the process of having the committee do it and come back to the council. So it's more likely that the council final action will be on the 19th of December. And we have some other agenda items scheduled for next week. And I need to talk with the counselors who are sponsors, but at least we want to start getting a first discussion and presentation of what was a proposed real estate transfer fee. And so that is a definite for the agenda for next week, in addition, because we need to move forward with it. And I think, Sean, if I'm correct, the other thing is, are we taking anything going back to sewer regulations?
Yeah, Amy and Guilford are planning to attend, and I think the committee's looked at water already, so this will be the sewer, getting input on those.
And there have been revisions that were done by the TSO committee, and we were going to get the current versions from TSO out, but that's not the critical point for this committee, though I certainly want to give us an opportunity if anybody has any comments on them. A lot of it flowed from our prior discussion. At the last round on water and sewer regulations, we spent a lot of time talking about what were the options for having the fund itself, the enterprise fund, accept responsibility for repairs that were essentially under the street, so between the main and the property line. and did some calculations with the help of staff on understanding what would be the best approach to use and what would be the effect on future rates for water by making that change. We did not have that discussion about sewer. And so the one piece that's missing from our prior discussion is what this is about for next week, which is from the home to the sewer main or wherever we, or what we recommend in that regard, and what would the effect be on the sewer rates for, so that's the discussion. Sean, do you think that I have stated it correctly?
Yep. Yeah, no, and I think, again, as you said, the effect on rates and on sort of the future trajectory of our enterprise funds. We already have rates that are trending up because of large capital improvements. And so this will, amplify that. And so, whatever ultimately is approved, we'll try to forecast in our enterprise budget projections when you look at water and sewer rates later in 2023.
So,
Liz?
yeah, staying on this topic. So will we be looking at projections for what it would cost additionally, like we did for water, what it would cost additionally to go from the main to the property line? Will we have those for next week?
So what I think we will have for next week is Amy and Guilford have estimated increases in cost on an annual basis, and we can translate that to what it means to the water rate. And we can translate that to, what that means in terms of actual dollars for maybe the average consumption in town. We have enough information to do all that.
But when we looked at water, they gave us some figures for what the amount of increase would be that we would have to consider in FY 24 or 25, whenever we're going to implement this. If we go from the main to the property line for water, are they going to have something similar for
It'll be
sewer?
whatever so I think they have comparable information for the changes
Okay.
in the sewer
Okay. Thank you.
regulations as they did for the water. Yep.
That's all I wanted to know. Thanks.
So I have, we have no minutes on the agenda. I know we have, I think, a backlog of at least 3 from the fall. We took care of everything that was through the June meetings, and we had previously done the summer meetings and the first fall meeting. So we're getting caught up, and we'll try and get back to that. But I frankly was spending so much time on this draft 1 that I did not have time to do minutes. So just leave it at that. And I have no unanticipated business to discuss. If anybody else has things that they want to raise under unanticipated business, raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we're done. So seeing no hands.
Before we go, Andy, just thank you again for all the work that you did getting us these this prototype document and managing the discussion and being so gracious. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. It's not easy to put yourself out there like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kathy, I'll be interested in seeing what you have.
Okay,
Your edits are always very thoughtful. And we
thank
should
you.
talk about other issues too, but anyway, talk to you soon, and thank you, and we are adjourned.
Thanks.
And time is 4:55, I believe.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.